Hey everybody. So I know that I did a video on Peter Schiff really recently, but he was on Joe Rogan just yesterday, and so I was like, I gotta make a video about it. I mean, it's not every day that he comes on. So for those of you who don't know, Peter Schiff is a prominent libertarian economist as well as the owner of an asset management company, Euro Pacific Capital. It's kind of funny. It's based out of Puerto Rico because he doesn't want to pay income taxes. That is literally the reason that he said, I am there because I don't want to pay taxes. And so that shows a little bit. What he does here is he gives his analysis on why poor people are poor and why public education, why that's not a good thing, and why he supports, I guess, just privatizing the education system.
If you've got a lot of poor people, why are people poor, right? They're poor because they don't have the skills, or they can't earn enough money. They're not productive enough to generate income, above the poverty line. So if you have people who are poor, the way to make them less poor is to increase their productivity, right? One way, obviously, is through education when they're young.
So here's the problem with that analysis. We know that productivity has gone up over the years. We can see it. We can see, there are indicators where we can measure these metrics. We can look at how productivity has gone up. Real wages for middle class and lower class workers has not gone up. It is remained stagnant, especially when you adjust for inflation. What has gone up is corporate profits. We can look. These have gone up at an exponential rate. It's almost like the corporations are just kind of keeping the profit, not paying their employees more because they don't have to. We don't have strong unionization in this country. We have workers bargaining as individuals, and it's just when you're dealing with a large corporation, you have very little bargaining power as an employee. That is why we need so much more unionization in this country. And so, I mean, we just know that the lack of productivity is not the problem because we've seen productivity gone up. And so anyway, let's keep going.
But I don't think government education is the solution, because I don't think government education is educating anybody. I think government schools are run for the benefit of the bureaucracy, of the school districts, of the teachers' unions. I want free enterprise. I want vouchers or private schools to compete for education.
So here's the problem with voucher programs, and honestly, I'll address private schools first. The problem with private schools is when you have just parents putting their kids in private schools, when the wealthier parents, when their interest is the kids in the private schools. If you only have middle and lower income people going to public schools, there is less incentive for people to make these schools run better. Because if rich parents also had their kids going to public schools, there would be a much bigger push to make public schools better. But the rich parents don't have to worry about it. They send their kid to the nice private school. They don't have to worry about kids in public schools. And also, there's a huge problem with the way that we fund schools in this country. We fund them based on property taxes. So that means if you're a school in a poor area, you're not going to have very much funding. If you're a school in a rich area, you're going to have a ton of funding. I mean, literally, you can drive in the same town. You can drive from one area to another, and you can see one school just look really run down, not very well put together. You can see another school that looks like a college campus. There's a huge disparity. The problem with vouchers, let's move the vouchers, is that so what those are for those of you who don't know, basically, so you'd have these different schools, and you'd give parents vouchers where they could send their kid to another school if they wanted to. So say you're in a district with a low-income district, and you don't like the school in your area. Well, because of the voucher, you could send your kid to a better district. The problem with that, one, is it's a little harder. So some parents just can't take their kids 30 minutes to go to school, and maybe the buses, maybe there isn't a bus system that'll get them there. The other problem is, I've heard this analogy before, is if you have a messy room in your house, you don't just go to a clean room and then just close the door on the messy room. And that's kind of what the vouchers are doing. It's like saying, oh, okay, we'll just leave the poor school, and then we'll just leave behind the messy school. The problem is there are kids who are just not going to be able to, for whatever reason, they're not going to be able to go use the vouchers. They're going to stay at that school. You're not going to have these schools become completely empty. And so those kids are just kind of left behind by voucher programs. And so those are just a couple of the problems with saying that we should move to private schools and we should move to vouchers. But there are a few more problems, and Peter Schiff, let's hear him make his case first.
Dollars, just the way, the cell phone companies are competing. They want me to buy their cell phone instead of somebody else's. They have to make it better, and they have to make it less expensive. So let's have schools that are competing to be the best, to offer the best education at the best value. And we've got in these cities, we've got these poor kids trapped in these failed government schools. They waste their time. They learn nothing. A lot of these kids graduate. They're not even literate. I mean, they can't even do basic basic arithmetic.
Right, but in the current state of the world right now,
education,
but in the current state of the world right now, those
education.
people don't have any other options. Those people,
they don't have any other options because the government has taken away that option.
But what do you do for them in real time? But what do you do for them in real time? If you have a guy who's in a lower income family and he has a 7-year-old son, and that kid is going to school right now, like how do you fix that right now by making it an open free market?
Private schools, the kid could go there.
They couldn't afford that.
Right?
What if they couldn't afford the private school?
Private schools, for people who are really poor, private schools would give out scholarships to kids that have a lot of potential and their parents don't have the money. But when the private sector educates kids, it's cheaper.
Lot of potential, a lot of potential. That bothers me because, like, what if a kid doesn't have a lot of potential? Then he doesn't get an education because he can't afford a private school.
But let's say a kid doesn't have a lot of potential. A certain type of education might be a waste.
Yeah,
that
but when the kid's
might
7,
be better off learning a trade.
He
might be better off learning how to do something.
How would you know?
Learn a trade.
How would you know while the kid is 7? If the kid's in first grade and is 7, how do you know whether or not that kid has a lot of potential? That's crazy.
Yeah, 7 is, I don't know, 7 might be a little young.
How old
I think
before you pull the plug on that kid?
The tuition in first or second grade is probably going to be less than in high school. Because in order to teach a second grader, the teacher doesn't have to know as much as a teacher needs to know to teach a 10th grader. So you wouldn't have.
All right, so there are just so many problems with what he said there, and I'm really glad that Joe Rogan pushed back on it. He did it in kind of a joking way, but it's so true. If we had an entirely privatized school district or school system, you would have people like where kids go to school would be entirely dependent on how much money their parents make. And you can see right away how that would create some big problems. That's not how it should work. Because like Joe Rogan said, you don't know like a kid's like academic potential at 7. And so the determinant would not be their academic potential. It would be how wealthy their parents are. And that's just not fair. Because he said, well, Peter Schiff, he shows his cards there because he says, oh, well, some kids, maybe they're not cut out for that kind of education. Elementary school kids. This is who we're talking about. We're talking about elementary, middle school, even high school. This is so early in life, and we're already going to have this, like, huge disparity in education outcomes and, like, the quality of education people are receiving. That is the system that he is talking about, where there's some kids so early, it's like, well, your parents don't make a lot of money, you can't afford to go to the nicer school. Maybe a trade school is your option. That's not fair to that kid. Why does this 7-year-old kid, why should how much money his parents make have any determinants on the quality of education that they make? It shouldn't have any determinant on that. And then the other thing he says there, it just shows, unfortunately, this is not just Peter Schiff that holds this opinion. We just don't respect early childhood education, and like the early stages of education, we just don't look at it the same in this country, and that's awful. And I talk about Scandinavia all the time. They put so much importance on early childhood education. They have good preschools, good or primary schools, what they call it, like first, second, third grade. They make sure that that's important. They know how important. They have quality. They have quality teachers. They have teachers that know that what kids need at that age. That a lot of it doesn't need to be spent like learning letter. A lot of kids need to learn through play and all this stuff, but I won't get into that here. The fact of the matter is though is that early teaching does require good teachers. It really does, actually, especially when a lot of the brain development happens early on. It's actually really important. If you look at like how good the early childhood education is for a country, that is a really good determinant of how successful, how happy that country is. And we just don't prioritize that at all here. We really don't. We don't. People look down on early childhood education, and that is we're seeing the results of that. We are seeing the results. I mean, I'm sure everyone's heard of the preschool to prison pipeline. This stuff starts young, and when we are segmenting people by class, when they're just starting in school, that's going to create a lot of problems for our society. And luckily, a lot of the ideas that Peter Schiff holds are pretty out there. I think that most people don't think that we should have entirely privatized education. Some people, surely. But it'd be a disaster. It would be a complete and total disaster. But anyway, if you guys disagreed with anything I said in this video, make sure to leave a comment down below. But if you enjoyed the video, make sure to like and subscribe, and have a great day.